This is a president who I think does not understand the Constitution, nor believe in the Constitution, doesn't understand the rule of law, thinks that he is above the law, makes the most outrageous statements, almost suggesting that he thinks he's a king and not an elected official. And I think that's what the impeachment process will bring out.
Welcome back. That was Bernie Sanders today. He spoke more forcefully about impeachment than he has before, saying he believes the president should be impeached. But when asked about his vote in the Senate, Sanders wouldn't say, reminding reporters outside his home in Vermont that as a senator, he will be acting as a juror. Joining me now is another senator, another 2020 candidate, and another potential juror, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. And Senator, you and I have had that conversation before about that. But Let me ask you this. You're on the Judiciary Committee. The chairman of your committee is Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina. He has talked about bringing Rudy Giuliani. What kind of role do you expect the Judiciary Committee to end up playing here? And do you think it's going to be as sort of a way to troll the impeachment process, or will it actually be fact-finding?
I don't think we're trolls. I think that we will be involved in fact-finding. I'm not certain how this will be set up with the trial. But I said when Lindsey Graham announced he wanted to bring Rudy Giuliani before the committee, I said, bring it on. I would love to ask him questions, and this actually came before we found out about the arrest of two of his business associates. And just yesterday, as ranking on the Rules Committee, I actually asked for more information. And I think to step back here a little, Chuck, having just had the president in my state last night, I believe, and I was listening to your last panel, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that this is about the truth. This is about a president, as Bernie had just said, that's flaunting the Constitution, and we have a constitutional obligation to move ahead. But it is also about a president who is literally putting his own business, partisan, political issues in interest in front of not just the law, but in front of the country. So instead of talking to the president of China about getting us out of the mess we're in, and I don't believe anything he says when he says he reaches partial agreements, but instead of doing that, he asked for dirt on an opponent. Instead of talking to the president of Ukraine about Russian invasion, he's asking for dirt on an opponent. And when I'm out there in these Midwestern states that we have to win, people are talking about a president that have not kept his promise, and that includes Trump voters. So I just don't want to lose sight of the fact, and why I went to those Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and why I know I can take this guy down in the Midwest, and specifically in Minnesota, Iowa, those states, is that there is a lot of dissatisfaction with what's going on, and we can't forget that when we campaign, that this is about those states.
Let me ask you a job about on the Senate side here for a second. There's a lot of bipartisan concern about what's happening in Turkey, what's happening to the Kurds. Is there anything that can put the toothpaste back in the tube here, or is it over?
I wish there was. I don't think this idea. I was appalled when, he says, "Oh, I'll put on sanctions if you let ISIS fighters out, or if they cause unrest in some way." Give me a break. He should never have let this happen in the first place. He literally let Erdogan go, and they are now. The news today is they almost hit our own troops because we have some troops, of course, that are still located there. This bombing is going so far and wide on the border area. And so this is not something I would ever have done. It not only sends a message and creates more disarray in Syria with the possible rise of ISIS again, it sends a message, just as everything else he does, to all of our allies that we don't stand with them. You hear concerns out of Israel. Look what he did on the climate change agreement. Look what he did when he thought he could bring a hot dish to the dictator next door by going over to meet with Kim Jong-un with no effect. This is what this guy does. He embraces dictators, he makes spontaneous decisions, and he doesn't care what the repercussions are, not just for these poor Kurds who stood by our side, but for all our foreign policy. It's outrageous. And the fact that Republicans are finally getting mad, great. Now I need them to get mad about Ukraine and Russia and everything else.
It seems like, as a candidate for president, you and all the candidates are in a bit of a conundrum here. Because I've heard the same thing from the voters you talk to on the ground, which is they're not focused on impeachment, they're not focused on these things, they're focused on the everyday problems you just talked about. And yet, at the same time, this thing is at a critical point. How do you break out? How do you handle this moment where you know the focus is in one direction in Washington, but the voters, in some ways, are just sort of playing wait and see?
When you look at 2018, they wanted a check and balance on this guy, and it wasn't just because they were worried about what he would do economically or with foreign policy. They actually wanted a values check and balance, Chuck. They did. They know he's mean-spirited. They know he's not looking out for their kids or the long term. So that hasn't changed. That is still there, and that's a lot of my argument, that I don't want to just be the president for half of America. I want to be the president for all of America. We have to win, but we have to win big with a coalition of a fired-up Democratic base, bringing in independents and moderate Republicans. And you do that by focusing on the things that matter to them and making the case that this guy has been whining, he's been letting them down. And I just don't think enough of my opponents are talking about that. Yeah, I listened while your panel debated what's happening with Andrew Yang and all of these things. I'm out there in the states that we need to win, including doing a tour around Ohio leading up to the debates. Let's remember this. It's the blue wall that we need to build, and Donald Trump is going to pay for it.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, I'm going to let you go here. I'm up close to the end of my hour. Stay safe on the trail. Thanks for coming out and sharing your views. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.